You are live.
Thank you. Welcome back to the Vermont House Appropriations Committee. It is still Friday, February 10th, 2023. It is a little bit after 3:15, and we are going to hear our last budget for the week, so I want to welcome them. This is the Center for Crime Victim Services. You have not met us all before. So
Not.
there's a couple people missing, but we'll go around and introduce ourselves, and then you can, for the record, state who you are and start. I am Representative Diane Lamfer. I live in Virgins, and I represent Addison 3.
I'm Robin Schy from Middlebury. Welcome.
Pat Brennan from Colchester.
Tiff Lumley from Burlington.
Carrie Dolan from Princeton, Duxbury, Morristown, Waitsfield, and Warren.
Oh, you're busy.
Hi, Mark Mahoney from Callis, Marshfield, and Plain.
Thank you.
Trevor Squirrel, Underhill, and Jericho.
Rebecca Holcomb from Sharon, Stratford, Deptford, and Harwich.
Jim Harrison from Chippenden, Mendon, Ellington, Pittsfield, Rutland 11.
Thank you, and good afternoon. For the record, I'm Jennifer Coleman. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services.
And I'm Carol Brochu, and I'm the Director of Finance and Administration for the Center.
Shall I proceed?
You can proceed.
Yeah. Our thoughts for today, and we were hoping this would be the most helpful way to proceed, but just to give you an overview of the Center for Crime Victim Services, because we are unique, so we're going to keep you on your toes this Friday afternoon. And then to talk about an overview of our funding and our very simple requests. And then Carol is here as the brains of the operation to answer those finer details. Does that seem?
Sounds perfect.
Right, so we are one of the, I think, 5 quasi-state agencies, and we are established in 13 VSA 5361. And we have a couple of different major responsibilities per the statute. We are responsible for sort of being this clearinghouse and this voice for victims' needs throughout the state. And we are also responsible for, direct service capacity on a couple of different programs, and I'll explain those to you, as well as administering state and federal grant funds out to different agencies. When I say quasi-state agency, what that means is we are a state agency, but we're not state employees. So there are 19 of us that are not funded through any general fund dollars, but are funded through special and federal funds, and I'll take you through what that looks like. When I want to speak to the direct service programs that we do operate, about just a couple of minutes, one of them is Victims Compensation Program. The Victims Compensation Program is a program that can provide up to $10,000 of support to victims and survivors of crime who, when it's a violent crime or a personal crime, and it can be for anything relative to mental health counseling, medical expenses, lost wages, temporary living, and that's a piece that we only need to have probable cause to be able to provide that support to victims. So if a law enforcement officer provides that there's probable cause, we can provide support. Usually it only takes a program within 5 to 7 days to start working with the victim and survivor and provide that immediate support. And unlike other states, we do not require that there be a prosecution. We don't require the victim to participate in what is expected from a prosecutor. And we also leave those cases open in perpetuity. What we know is that victims often don't report within, for example, a year, like some other programs require. We often know that victims may have losses that come up later on. They might not need mental health counseling immediately, but then a few years later, they're like, okay, this is really impacting me in a different way. So our program is really a leader amongst other states in terms of really being victim-centered and meeting victims where they're at. So that's one important program that we provide, and work so closely with the state's attorney's office and law enforcement in terms of making sure victims have that notification right away. The other important piece, and again, I'm going to tout Vermont again as a leader, is providing restitution in a very different way than any other state in this country. When I started back at the center in a very different capacity, DOC was responsible for collecting restitution. And that was a failure to pay restitution resulted in somebody having to, basically be violated on probation, furlough, other pieces that are involved in another criminal offense. And we looked at that model and we saw that victims weren't getting paid. We saw that a collection agency was getting more money off the top than anybody else and charging people who owed restitution fines. And that, again, we were resulting in more charges being filed against people who just didn't have that ability to pay. So the legislature, in its wisdom, decided to set up what's called the restitution unit and a restitution fund. And I'll speak more to how those funds are provided. But essentially what that allows for is if there's a restitution judgment order after there's been a conviction, if it's an individual victim, we can provide up to $5,000 of immediate relief out of the fund. So victims are not waiting, for that to be collected. And then we work with the person, we work with the offender, but there's no criminal consequences. We set up payment plans. We make referrals to working fields and other job placement agencies. And we work with them to try and figure out how we can collect the money. But the victim is out of the mix in most of those cases. And we feel like that's such an important service that we provide as well. So those are two programs that, we operate in-house, I would say. Other direct service program that we're still in the books that we're responsible for is the Victim Assistance Program. That's actually administered by do you have a question? I'm sorry.
Really does. I didn't want to cut you off.
I don't want to interrupt the flow here. It's great.
Go for it.
The Victims Compensation Program, I get it. It depends on probable cause, not on, prosecution. Probable cause of what? That you were a victim or?
That there was a crime,
crime,
an eligible crime. So a law enforcement officer, if they find there was probable cause, for example, that that there was an individual that the person was a victim of stalking, and that would come to us, and we could begin to work with the victim, work with the advocate.
Even if they haven't prosecuted anybody or found the perpetrator.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
But we certainly do verify. We're not just like, here's your money. We are verifying with receipts and other pieces. But it's really just about, if we waited for prosecution to happen, especially with what's happening with the case log, the backlog, that would be 2 years out, and people are needing medical help,
right.
Mental health help, and certainly it's always also after insurance. So we go through insurance first. So we work with victims. If there is insurance, we'll help them to do that piece. So it is a little bit more in detail, and I'm happy to talk with you about it more.
Thank you.
Good. All right, continue.
And I was speaking to the Victim Assistance Program. Currently, we are statutorily responsible for that under 13 BSA 5304. That consists of 27 victim advocates who work in the state's attorney's office. And originally that was set up about 36 years ago or so, where there was this disconnect between, the state's attorneys having the ability, having the personnel decisions and being able to be responsible and supervising advocates, which is as it should be. But we were set up as the entity that was going to find the funds for that program. And for a while it worked well, and you'll hear about this more when special funds and federal funds were plentiful. They are not so much, and you'll hear about that. So right now, the funding for that program goes to the state's attorney's and sheriff's office, and we actually just had a bill go through House Judiciary today that will fix it so that the Department of State's attorneys and sheriffs is statutorily responsible. So technically we're on the books, but that's in the process of changing. So I just wanted to mention that.
Representative Squirrel?
Yeah, and I think a point of clarification, this happened last year. So you're no longer having to take your special fund dollars and send it to the state's attorneys.
Nope, it's very helpful.
It's now its own budget item under the state's attorney's general fund.
Freeing up their special funds.
funds.
Yes, it makes Carol's life a lot easier to not have to account
But
for.
there are some policy considerations, which is what you're dealing with.
But we're all in agreement. Everything's good.
Okay, good.
So I'm going to continue.
I can tell Representative Squirrel says that there's thinking that there's probably more to that story, but so far, so good.
We're good.
Okay.
I just talked to John Campbell today. We're good.
Okay.
As far as the third responsibility, which is pretty much the major one, I think in terms of how you will come to know us, is our responsibility for administering grants, which are federal grants and state grants out into your communities. We currently support or administer 8 different federal grants. It's a little more than usual because some of that is relative to ARPA funds. But we are the pass-through for 8 grants currently right now at the federal level, and then state grant dollars. And how you'll see that in your communities is that this totals about 267 different sub-grants to 67 sub-grantees. So Carol has a lot on her plate as our one person who has to process all of these pieces. But the services in your communities that you might know about or hear about, or if you want to learn about them, it's the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence programs, child advocacy centers, supervised visitation programs, legal services for victims of crime, not so much in the criminal court, but we find that victims have so many needs that need to be supported through the civil arena, whether it be child custody, divorce, eviction from housing, employment. So those are pieces that can be supported through that the legal services component. Voice and choice and restorative justice. We support 5 different victim liaisons in 5 restorative justice programs, and that's something that as we continue to think about reform efforts, we'd like to continue to do more of. We have support advocates at Disability Rights Vermont, Association of Africans Living in Vermont, the Vermont State Police Program. We have 2 advocates who we help out with prosecutors who are specialized in DV and domestic violence and sexual violence programs, human trafficking case managers, community of Vermont elders. So we've got a lot of different pieces that we're moving around. And I think, again, that's where you'll become familiar with how we interface with those different programs and the work that's involved in maintaining those pieces. So as far as just an overview of our funding, and we, as you can see from this highlight sheet, we have this little pie chart here that shows just how very little we receive in general fund dollars, about $1.4 million. And I want to underscore for all of you that not one penny of that goes to keeping our doors open. That's all direct pass-through. So your child advocacy centers, your supervised visitation programs, network programs are some examples of where that money just immediately goes to. So that's where, pardon me.
Oh, go ahead, Representative.
We first need to get the permission from the chair to ask the question, so.
And if she's not looking.
Oh, you're listening and taking notes. I'm just wondering, is that, so how are other similar organizations in other states funded? I mean, is it generally through the kinds of fees and grants that you're talking about, or is this, or is it general fund dollars? Do you know?
I think it's really piecemeal, and in one way, and Carol can correct me, but we're unique in a really good way because the center is kind of this hub where everything goes through. And so we have a good sense of where the gaps are and, what's happening and why isn't this happening here? Whereas in other states, it's, well, the advocates go through, these advocates go through that office and then these advocates go through that piece. So I think that it's really different. There's no model like ours that I know of, but I think from a policy perspective, I like our model. From a funding perspective, maybe not so much, if that helps.
Yeah.
Carol, did you want to speak to any of those pieces?
No, I think, around the general funds, just the analogy that everything is pretty much passed through. Mm-hmm. So that is different in other states that I've worked with, that they do receive more general funds, operation, personnel, and so forth, but the center does not.
Okay.
And I think that is an important piece that I don't think there's another state agency that doesn't get general fund dollars to keep the doors open. Mm-hmm. So that's just something that occurs to me, what I was thinking about today. I was like, okay, we're doing this through, other ways, but I would be interested to find out, because I haven't heard of this happening, where there's no general fund dollars that go to another state agency. But we pass them through and we're happy to be able to do that. But that helps also to answer your question.
Thank you.
Welcome. I've got Representative Mahali, please.
I see you're adding 2.5 FTE. How many FTE are you all together?
Well, currently right now we are 19.
Okay.
We are 19 staff. We lost 9 staff over the past few years, and we have been able to bring back one. When we had 2 FTEs, one was a replacement for somebody who left, and then so that changed that. And then one was replacing one of the positions that was vacant. then the other half-time is not currently.
So these FTE are replacements.
Yes, they're not new.
Right, and we have, 2 of those 19 are part-time. So we have 17 full-time, 2 part-time.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, can I just clarify that point? So your budget is filling some vacant positions, is that what?
So the budget that we had, we did have a vacancy position that we recently hired and a new position that was also a vacant position that I had to build into the 24 budget. So that's what it is. We still have a vacant part-time position that's also built into this budget.
Okay, so it's like,
And keep in
had
mind,
vacancy savings, but we're taking some of that away so you can do your job.
I built into the budget the need for additional staff that we just recently.
But we're not creating new positions.
No, and keep in mind, we're not state employees. So when we say creating new positions, we're not state employees.
Okay.
That is very different, again, as Jen has mentioned.
I'm in the state.
That's right. So you're thinking like, oh, you're creating new positions.
Right.
So we're a little different in that way.
Yeah, okay. Then you probably don't budget vacancy savings either. Thank you.
Representative,
Yeah, thank you. When you say you've got 19 employees and some part-time, when you're putting the victim's advocate in the state's attorney's office, is that included in those numbers?
No, they're not our employees. They're state employees.
They're the state, they're the ones that the state employees working under the state attorney general.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
As
And
they-
yours, you've got your own shop with 19 or 20 employees,
Yeah, 17 full, 2 part.
17 too. Okay.
And that's to help largely, it's our restitution unit and our victims' compensation.
That's the other
program.
piece.
There's very little of us who do the administrative piece.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Dolan?
Good afternoon, and thanks very much for coming. And this is critically important work that you're providing for Vermonters. Thank you for that. I'm trying to better, excuse me for some of my questions. Maybe I'm trying to catch up with your presentation, and your materials here talk about a declining revenue source in special funds.
Yes, I was about to get to that.
Oh, okay. That's one question. And then the other question is whether you retain with all the grant funds, because you're managing those grants, do you retain a certain percentage of those grant dollars for administrative purposes? Okay.
But only for federal grants,
Correct.
not for state grants.
No state grant.
We don't retain any general fund, anything for the general fund dollars we
Or
administer
special.
or anything for the special fund dollars we administer. Only federal.
And what is the Fed percentage?
Generally, it's a 5% rule, that you can keep 5% of the total grant award for administrative cost.
Okay, thank you.
That's how we can sit here today.
Good.
Good? Yes. I've got Representative Holcomb.
Is there a state, so those federal funds, you're given a 5% administrative overhead out of those funds, but you are not required to have a state match to retain those, or are you?
Not on our level. Our sub-awards would be required to have a match in order to receive those federal dollars.
Okay, I'm getting it now. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, now I can get to the exciting piece about our declining funds. With respect, I'll start, I think, I just want to say that, again, we're kind of in this weird situation as a state agency where Carol is, again, I'm sure the only person tasked as a director of finance who has to figure out how to build a budget based on predictions and projections. And the additional piece that complicates this for us is that the grant cycle that we award our 67 subgrantees starts on July 1st. But for federal and special funds, we don't really get a sense of where we're at until the fall. So we're in a difficult position often when we have to not only build the budget based on projections, but also figure out, okay, are we banking on, do we roll the dice or do we cut positions? And cutting positions means the boots on the ground. So I really am grateful to Carol for figuring out how we can do this. But I just wanted to preface that piece, and now I'll speak to what we're looking at. The federal funding picture had been pretty bleak. Primarily, we rely on Victims of Crime Act dollars, which are usually referred to as VOCA dollars, to support the vast majority of our subgrantees in some capacity. And that fund had been doing really well several years ago. And over the past several years, we've lost about $9 million in federal, VOCA dollars that come in. And that's impacted our subgrantees tremendously. And that source of funding is no longer the stable funding that it used to be. And it's quite volatile. There was a VOCA fix, as they call it, 2 years ago, which was intended to kind of stabilize that fund. Primarily, one of the reasons that we saw such a huge drop was that not only was there a lack of prosecutions or a declining rate of prosecution, but also there was more deferred prosecutions. And when there was a deferred prosecution, those fines and fees that should have been coming in were not being put in place. So VOCA is funded, I should have said, through fees and fines on criminal convictions. So when you have a huge case like an Exxon Valdez or I forget the big, I don't want to say it, but a big case like that, a big case where there's millions and millions of dollars, that could really boost the fund. But if there's not prosecutions or if there's deferred prosecutions, money wasn't going into the fund. So there was a fix a couple of years ago to say, okay, deferred prosecutions, the money's still going to go into the fund. It's not going to go into some other place. And we've seen a little bit of hope, but it's not even close to where it was. And again, that creates that problem for us where we're looking at subgrants that have to go out on July 1st and not knowing what VOCA is going to look like until several months later. So that's not been, the reliable source that it once was, but we are hopeful. The special funds are a little bit, remain problematic. And as you can see, from the pie chart, federal and special funds are basically what we rely on. Special funds come through fees and fines that are levied on traffic tickets and also on criminal convictions. And that is found in 13 VSA 7282. And what that currently means is that there's a $47 surcharge, $29.75 goes to our Victims' Compensation Fund, and $10 goes to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund. In addition to those two special funds, we also have the Restitution Special Fund, which is an additional 15%. Back in 2013, we already, and this body already saw that there was a huge decline in special funds. They've decreased about 47%. So, there's certainly, COVID wasn't helpful, but this isn't a COVID issue. There's not going to be a huge rebound. And the legislature had commissioned a study back in 2013, and the report came back and said, this is not sustainable. The Center for Crime Victim Services cannot continue to do this. So we got about almost 10 years out, and then back in 2021, the legislature said, all right, we need to take a look at this again. Let's have joint fiscal take a look, do a report, which was issued in February of 2022. And before I turn to that report briefly, I do want to say when we think about those special funds and why I say, again, it's a trend that's been a decade in. And it's not COVID related. It's relating to the fact that there are some very good reasons that, one is criminal justice reform. As we think about, and we support that, but as we think about diverting people away and we think about waiving surcharges, waiving fees and fines, it's a good policy thing, but in terms of how it impacts us financially, it does. It has a ripple effect.
I'd rather say that I was on appropriations when that last report came out in 20, yeah. Mm. So, sorry.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. And as far as the traffic tickets, I often joke that back in the heyday when the troopers were out there, I contributed, I don't even know how much to the funds.
Yeah.
I confess that. But now, we all know that not only are law enforcement officers just not available, the resources aren't there, but also there's a change in shift in policy in terms of how we, intercept people if we think there's a traffic violation.
Right, and there's a real sensitivity to over fining Vermonters that are already in a financial constraint, and yeah. Did you have a question, Representative Blumen?
Oh, no,
no. Now I'm just catching it out of the corner of my eye.
So we're in a position where we, as far as, again, policy-wise, we understand and support a lot of these pieces because we don't want to overburden people, but it does impact what we rely on.
This is that maybe unintended consequence that rolls down. So is this the bill that we see, that you referred to? I'm looking, that the $7.25,
Yes,
that's on the bill that they're discussing upstairs?
yes.
And if I may too, just to add to the administration is supportive of this.
Yes, it's in the governor's recommend.
Important to say.
Is that
Yes, sir.
so you left me hanging at the cliff, so I don't have the background. So there's this 2021 report that came out last February.
Yes.
Concluding,
That we're in trouble.
Yeah, okay.
But the number one option that
Was
they
there options?
suggested
Yeah.
was that there's currently in the way that the surcharge is constructed, there is, again, the $29.75 that goes to the Victims Compensation Fund, the $10 to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund, there's $7.25 that goes to the general fund. And when Joint Fiscal did their analysis, they said, well, if the $7.25 were to go back into the special funds that support victim services, that could generate between $300,000 and $400,000. So it's a Band-Aid, but it's a helpful Band-Aid, and it's something that feels that it makes sense if the ask is not a general fund request, but just to maybe shift what's already happening. It is a declining revenue source, so we're
For
hoping.
the general fund, it's a declining because it's taking the $7.25 that would normally be going into the general fund and moving it. So it's a spend on our side.
Yes, but it's also a risk on our side because.
Yes, I'm just saying,
Yes,
when we
it
look
would
at
be-
the.
That would be the
constructed
shift.
spend.
when you say it decreased by 40, you started off by saying the special funds are down by 47%. How much is that? About.
Well, they've got 3.4 million in special fund there, right?
Correct. The three different funds receive different amounts.
Right.
In general, I can just tell you that, I can say that, a few years back, I was doing a $2 million budget with special funds on the compensation special fund, which is the one Jen's talking about. And now we're barely making probably $1 million on that.
So it's kind of $1 million down.
Yeah.
So let me see if I've got this right too. In the box, when we're looking at this page here, right? If I'm looking at the kind of the peach colored box above it, you've got the three funds that make up that special fund.
Correct. There are three special funds that are included in that dollar amount.
And then normally, and I'm familiar only with the $47 from my time on transportation too, the $47 surcharge on a variety of fines and fees, okay? So that $47 is broken out into $29 would go to the Victim Compensation Fund. Do I have that right?
$29.75.
$29.75 goes to the number one. $10 goes to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund,
Yes.
right? And $7.25 goes to the general fund.
Yes, correct.
And the Crime Victims Restitution Fund, something about 15%.
15% on top of.
Fines.
Yes.
So one is traffic tickets, one is
15% on
and
fines.
fees.
Okay, so when we're talking about the $47 is a revenue source,
The surcharge on a traffic.
surcharge that's a revenue source, that's the divvying up. So the $7.25 would be if judiciary or whoever upstairs is looking at this would be coming to us, which is why Representative Scroll gave me another look earlier, is because that would be asking us to spend this money in that way. So we would have to determine how much with the competing, can we afford it? Not to say that you don't need it, just, right.
Certainly.
Okay,
Can I ask Trevor
Go
a
ahead.
question?
ask Trevor. Trevor,
Representative Squirrel, I thought we did this. We didn't do this. What did we do last year or the year before with the 47? Because it came up, right?
There might have been conversation about it.
Right, now they do.
As a matter of fact, it was the issue with Crime Victim Services that drove the JFO report, even though the
Yeah,
right.
JFO report looks at a lot of different special funds, but it was their circumstances that sort of drove this.
Okay.
I mean, if you think about the last couple of years, those of us who've been around for a couple of years, we've been backfilling the decline in the special funds.
Yes, we have.
And the only reason we're not looking at as much, if I may say that, is because of the change we made with the benefits and basically saying, keep the VOCA money and the general fund dollars to the program. So, but it didn't solve the whole problem.
That sounds like another.
And special funds are a problem going forward, and we're not solving the problem.
Right.
No, we're not.
Did I have that right?
It's a Band-Aid,
It's a
but
lot of Band-Aids.
It's a $300,000 Band-Aid,
Between two funds.
2
Yeah,
to
between-
5. Yeah.
and one, as you'll hear, is in significant trouble. But as far as to address Representative Shy's,
Sources.
yes, we do. But just to Representative Shy's point, I think that by the time that this report had come out last year, you all, by you all, I mean House Appropriations, had already gotten too far into your deliberations to have a meaningful conversation. So I think it was just timing in terms of how it all happened. So we're happy that they did their work and I'm bringing that forward. Representative Shy just mentioned that. I think it was timing when JFO released their report. You all had really gotten too far into your discussions.
Because it's
I feel like
February.
I've seen this 47 for even when I was on Ways and Means.
Because it's a standard fee, yeah.
I know, but I thought we would looked at,
Yeah.
it'd be nice to get this off.
So it's like they're like $700,000 short of making up that line.
Okay, so we,
And as Representative Squirrel did mention, that this is in the governor's recommend and language. I know Representative Rachelson has a bill that's just about to get assigned a number that will put the surcharge language in its place. And we've had many conversations with House Judiciary, and I know that they're very supportive of this. As soon as I get the number to that bill, I'll certainly forward it to Representative Squirrel. But I just saw the draft this morning, so.
right, and you'll let us know what the price tag is for 725. Representative, go ahead.
Just one quick question. When was the last time that $47 was adjusted?
The last I can remember, it was a while, because I know that, I think the previous iteration of it expired in like 2013. So I feel comfortable saying about a decade in terms of how it's been adjusted. How it's been, when it's been revisited. I don't have the law in front of me, but I'm comfortable with a decade, but I could certainly get back to you with
And
that.
are you looking at it, at least in terms of the context of the bill, to readjust that or bring it up to a, present value?
No, I think we're keeping our asks small this year. We're thoughtful about the fact that for folks that can't pay, I mean, that's an issue, and we actually would like to have the whole surcharge issue revisited in fees and fines, because when our restitution unit works with those who owe restitution, I can tell you that the people who caused harm, who committed crime, are saying, but I thought I paid that. I thought I paid that. And they've come to me, my team, and said, there's like 6 different fees and fines that folks who commit a crime are being asked to pay. And
I can help you out a little bit on that because we were there. House Transportation was looking at back then, increasing fines for, traffic stops, speeding tickets, I don't know, jaywalking, which, we were looking at, okay, this is the fine of this infraction cost, let's just say $10. And we were going to move it to $15. But any of those infractions comes with, we didn't know, this $47 fee on top of it. So we had to take into consideration, it wasn't just the speeding ticket or this infraction, that even regardless of what it is, the person on the other end was going to feel the additional 47. So taking that into consideration, that was where we got a little bit underneath the hood on that, of understanding what the 47 was all about, that translated it, like you said, into the public. We think you're raising it, well, it's just, you're only paying $20. Well, it's not $20 to the person. It ends up being 67 when they feel it.
with convictions, there's a ITP fee that they pay to the courts. There's sometimes a supervision fee to the Department of Corrections. There's the SIU $100 surcharge. So it piles up. So that's just something that we were trying to be mindful of. Like, we just want to get by. We don't want to make it the burden, heavier. And that's a policy decision for all of you, is, how much do individuals who've committed crime then end up bearing the burden for state services. So I don't want to get off tangent, but
Okay, good. All right.
so our other request, and you'll see this in the memo that we submitted to the administration, and also in the governor's recommend, is that there currently under state statute, there is, that's in 20 VSA 2365, there's funding for a domestic violence trainer at the Criminal Justice Training Council. It's a state position, the state mandate, and that comes out of the DVSV fund. And that's to the tune of about $61,525. And we work.
So here again, it's moved to the general fund.
Yes, and the Criminal Justice Training Council is excited. They really want to stabilize this. It gets to one of our concerns about state employees being funded by volatile special funds or federal funds. So it feels like it's stabilizing that piece is important, especially when it's a mandate.
Where is this on the?
Criminal Justice Council.
It's in the letter, Mark. Oh, it's not.
in this right
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
And when Carol goes through sort of her pieces of the budget that are more specific, then she can flag those pieces for you. Shall I continue?
Oh, yes, we're just convincing about mostly like moving a fee, which was a fee generated and here again, special fund or fee, to moving it to the general fund versus what was once a fee, instead of looking at a fee increase to, minus the morality around what that actually means, but
I can finish up my piece pretty quickly,
Okay.
and Carol
All right, good.
can speak to some of these more specifics. Just finally, the other piece that we wanted to bring forward, and this is sort of the same issue where we have core services that are provided by state employees that are being funded with grant dollars. And specifically, I'm speaking to two positions at the Vermont State Police. There's the Victim Services Director and the Victim Services Specialist. Again, I'm going to say Vermont is a model that in this way, in that we have these people, these individuals, these advocates are first on the scene with troopers. Every death, whether it's accidental or a homicide, and every major crime, they are called out to go along with the troopers. And the troopers can't say enough about how helpful they are in terms of having that point person for when they're on the scene to say, in this case, Kate Brayton, Amy Farr, they've got you. And this program's been so successful that actually local law enforcement, when they have a major crime that state police might not be doing, will reach out to these two individuals who are on call 24/7 and providing really important pieces of contact, especially because there can sometimes be a delay before a case gets to the state's attorney's office. If there's an investigation, it could take a month, it could take 2 months, but then these victim advocates are right on the scene and immediately they're interfacing with victims, getting them support, getting them help. And the one position, the Victim Services Specialist, is funded with a discretionary grant that's going to end on June 30th. And there's no ability that we have to pick that position up. We had advocated for both these positions to be funded through general fund dollars. The governor did put in his recommend that the Victim Services Specialist, which again is funded through a discretionary grant, would be picked up by general fund dollars. What remains that was not in the governor's recommend was the Victim Services Director. And that currently is funded through $137,100 of our VOCA money, which is, as I said, a very volatile source. And our concern is that, we have two individuals who I interface with regularly in that department. And they're worried, are they going to have a job? And I just think about the incredible stress that they undergo when they're on the scene of sexual assaults, homicides, and they are worried. They're worried they're not going to have a position. And it feels to me like they don't need that additional stress when that job is just something I can't even imagine being a part of. So this would be a request that would go through the Department of Public Safety. I've spoken with Commissioner Morrison and with Major Dan Trudeau, who really support the program strongly. It just in terms of their request, they'd already put their request for positions, but they said, we're very supportive. We'll do whatever we can do. So our request would be to stabilize those positions as they should be and to do that with general fund dollars. And our benefit, the main benefit is that we have a stable program that is a huge resource and takes, deals with it. Oh, sorry.
Got two questions and then I want, because I'm not seeing it on your general fund dollars on your walk sheet. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that was actually my question, is that you said the governor supported moving to 137.1 for the director.
No, he supports the one that is funded through an Office of Victim, from OVW grant that actually the state police had written. So that grant is going to end. That's the one he picked up. The other one,
That's fine.
Yeah, it's not
We're not
reflected
seeing it on your
on our budget.
It's not
it's not in our budget.
It's not in our budget.
I'm doing this as a
That's
request on
their-
behalf, basically, of them.
That's their grant that ends, however, we're making the
It's
request.
not
Whose
a part-
budget is it going to be in?
The Department of Public Safety.
137,100.
Who has that? Representative Harrison? Sorry. it's-
That's what I'm trying to understand. So
Yeah.
you, and I can find it, but it's not the governor's recommend.
The 137,100 for the major crimes director position is funded through us through the VOCA grant.
Yes, and Carol has
So
those
that
numbers.
is currently in our VOCA budget, and it's in our budget. You don't see a decrease because again, at this point, we're still funding that position in the 24 budget.
Okay, you would prefer to see it general fund.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
And
Because it,
and you sort of alluded that the commissioner liked that idea, which.
that was our request, our budget request was for general funds to support both of these positions.
Okay.
It would take the burden of that 137 out of our VOCA funds and again, fund the position through DPS that ends as of June 30th of this year because that grant ends.
This is where it helps for us where when you're not state employees, so you're not coming with the governor's recommend. So when you say you request it, you're requesting it now, not, you may have requested to the governor, but it's not in the budget. We just need to understand like, where is
Yes, I
that
built a budget with that position.
without,
Then we discussed with finance the ability, like if.
and so it's not a part of
With
what
like
they,
725 and all of that.
it's
So it's,
not what they built. Okay, maybe some of it. So it's not in their budget to us.
So if we look at the Department of Safety, Public Safety budget as submitted by the governor, there we will find one of these two positions.
correct.
Well,
That's what we were told.
Maybe, maybe not.
Which one is it? Because is it the?
It's not the 137.
No, it's not. That comes out of our budget.
That comes,
Representative Squirrel,
it's not on here because it wasn't.
Representative Squirrel, please take the floor.
Yes.
and you, Carol can correct me if I'm wrong here. The 137, which is the Victim Services Director, is being paid currently by the VOCA grant.
Correct,
And because it's not an up or down, it's not in your crosswalk,
correct.
okay? And the ask is for public safety.
Pick it up.
That up in FY '24 and it'll be paid through general fund. And has to happen. all right?
That
That's
hasn't
the
happened.
conversation,
That hasn't happened.
Right? So Representative Harrison and I will probably have a conversation.
Yeah, because it's not in, it's not.
Victim Services Specialist is currently funded in public safety by a federal grant, which runs out at the end of FY '23. The proposal is for Department of Public Safety to pick that up in FY '24 and pay for that through general fund dollars.
In their
Getting
budget.
that correct?
Have it correct.
In their budget.
In their
Okay,
budget.
okay, got it.
All right.
Now we got it.
Thank you.
Then we asked Representative Harrison to check it out to see is it in there as a move
Yeah,
from,
we'll talk. We'll-
yeah, you guys,
We'll figure
you don't
it
need to look now, but that's where,
Okay.
thank you
Now
while we play.
understand, Sorry.
We have to chase the tail.
I apologize for the lack of clarity. I've never been a non-state employee asking for positions for another state agency, so I apologize.
You don't have to be sorry, because it's in translation of where, and understanding that when you're requesting, it's, yeah. a little different. Did I see a hand up over here?
You did, but
Okay.
I don't want
All right.
this is not related to that, so I'll just ask
We don't like to do-
Representative Squirrel.
Yes, Representative Slater's got this. I think we've gotten to the end of at least understanding it.
I think so.
Doing math on late on Friday.
Sun setting, it's.
Okay, good.
Summation, and I just want to, and I'll turn it over to Carol for questions and walk through, but just want to thank, this body did a really important thing last session when you gave us, provided us with a bunch of one-time money that helped us to avoid the cuts that we were fearful that we would have to make. And so I really appreciate your support, and we are just hoping for some simple asks, some of which don't come through us, but that will strengthen the net for victims and survivors. And, as far as that 137, we could really use those extra VOCA dollars to provide some support in terms of where there are deficits. Guessing that you probably would like Carol to do first.
We've at least got the ask clear. Representative Dolan.
We didn't quite get to the final ask, which was the 3% increase base. And I presume the level funded with the current state funds that provides you. I hope you can address that one.
Certainly, thank you for bringing that up. So last year, as we have discussed, the center had some general one-time appropriations. And our budget was very difficult, and we were obviously going through like JFO and so forth. So we never actually received a 3% increase to our base, the general fund base that we were getting last year. So we got all these general one-time funds, but we never got that increase in base. So what we're requesting is that base we should have gotten last year to be given this year. Although the budget, the ups and downs, you see that we did request a 3% increase this year, as requested through the budget process. So again, we're just asking for the 3%. You may see that there was an increase. There was a $150,000 increase in the general fund base the previous year. And that went directly to the anti-violence grants for the network for domestic and sexual violence. So there was no real increase other than direct pass-through to those programs. So the center hasn't really seen an increase in the base. And again, keeping in mind that this increase, although it's not a large amount, really does have an impact on the programs. So when Jen mentioned earlier, the general funds do support the supervised visitation, the CAC programs, the anti-violence grants, and some stop prostitution positions. So it does have an impact in giving additional funding to those programmings. That clear? Did I do you have a question?
I'm sure those that are, we can talk offline. I'm not very familiar with what the base includes to know what that 3% would be applying to, that's all. But that's something I'm sure we'll find out more information.
Sure. Any other clarity on that?
We good? Thank you. Coming in to Friday and entertaining our questions so late. You are free to go. We are done for the week. Monday, 12:30? 12:30. 12:30. I know that you're working hard in the morning on whether it's your budgets or stuff coming around. We'll see you then. Our agenda is posted. Yes. Our agenda is posted for next week. Give Aaron a big round of applause for plugging in. There's a couple of back for afternoon, right? Guys, we're not offline yet. I'm just saying. We're not offline yet.
Oh,
Just saying.
Just saying.
Just saying. So.
Hello, world.
Take a look at the agenda for next week, and when you see Thursday, there's a couple of rules, but we're waiting to hear back.